That's something Hugo's been saying a lot when he wants something. Hugo, grab it. So I guess it's on my mind. Just past 6:30 here in Winnipeg. This week in our Torah reading cycle, we are in the Parsha of Tazria-Metzora. Two parshiot often done together, Tazria-Metzora. This is there's not a lot of narrative in the Torah. It's all about these. It's where the book of Vayikra, and it's where the ancient Israelites get really, really obsessed with this idea of ritual impurity. Last week we read about kosher, but it's actually pure, impure, and they really take it in all the things that you know, all the bodily functions and all the natural phenomenon, like giving birth and all those sorts of reproductive systems that just naturally create different levels of impurity, and this whole idea of impurity. And then within it is this thing called sara'at. So Tazria, that's someone who gives birth, like the Zera. But that's Metzora is someone who's a leper. That's how they usually translate it, though it's not actual like scientific leprosy. It's not important. But they call them lepers, but they're not lepers, but it's this skin disease. And for me, last year when we hit this parsha, it was early in the pandemic. A year later, I feel like of all of the parshiot, of all of the parts of the Torah that have new meaning or a new lens, you know, now that the ancient Israelites were obsessed with this airborne ritual impurity they could not see. And, I mean, we're dealing with an airborne impurity we cannot see. And it's very, very serious. And for the Israelites, it was very, very serious. So serious that when people got this skin disease, they became a mitzorah, they became a leper, they would kick them outside the gate. The great story is not in the Torah, but in the Haftarah. The Haftarah for this parsha, or specifically for the double parsha, but the Haftarah with Metzora, is a story from the prophets, a story from the book of 2 Kings, and one of the stories in the cycle of a lesser-known prophet named Elisha. Not Elijah, not Eliyahu, Elisha. He's very famous. He's got that one where he brings the kid back to life. That's probably his most famous story. But this story is from inside his cycle, and it's about the siege of a place called Samaria, and the fact that the unlikely heroes of the story are these 4 lepers, the Arba'a Mitzoraim. That's how the Haftarah starts in chapter 7 in the book of 2 Kings, if you need some light Shabbos reading this evening. There are 4 lepers who have been kicked out of the city. The city's being sieged, but they've been kicked out of the city, and they're worried that if they try and go back into the city where there's also a famine, they'll die. But if they stay right where they are, they'll die. So they go to check out the nearby Aramean camp, and it turns out that the Arameans who are attacking the city, they're not there. God has actually tricked them. They're away. And these guys end up, ransacking the whole camp, coming back to the city saying, hey, guess what? There's no one at the camp. You can make a move. And there's this whole military victory and all of this stuff. And I've been thinking about this Haftarah, and I think there's 2 lessons. The one is the lesson that I always talk about. The lepers were societal outcasts, literally kicked out of the city. And yet they were the heroes. So it's that great reminder, it's a great lesson about not undermining or not underrating anybody. And certainly not assuming that there are people who can't be heroes, as unlikely as it may seem. So that's a great lesson there. But thinking a little bit about the pandemic and a year later, and sometimes people have trouble understanding or have trouble wrapping their minds around some of the measures, some of the things we do, what we do. The way the ancient Israelites dealt with their pandemic, their issue, was they would kick people out of the city. Might seem extreme. But if not for those measures in this particular story, these gentlemen wouldn't have even been in the place where they could become the heroes. Sometimes the measures we take, that's the other lesson, especially these days. Sometimes the measures we take have results that, yes, we expect, but even better ones that we don't expect. Both lessons during a time when it's very, very difficult not to get down and closed-minded. These 2 lessons together remind us to remain open-minded. And that was the message I wanted to share with you for this Shabbat evening, this toast to Shabbat. So please, let's do it. Page 90. Please rise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu. V'shabbat kodsho be'ava uvratzon hinchilanu. Zikaron lema'asev reshit. Ki hu yom techila l'mikrae kodesh. Zecher litziat Mitzrayim. Ki vanu v'acharta ve'otanu kidashta mikol amim. V'shabbat kodshecha ve'ava uvratzon hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat. Amen. L'chaim, l'chaim tovim u'shalom.